Welcome to this workshop on writing your research proposal. I'm Dr. Jen Anderson from the research team in the RMIT University Library. We're going to explore the structure and elements of the research proposal that will allow you to position yourself as a researcher and increase your confidence in writing. First, it's good to think about the nature of a research degree and how you and your research fit into this. And then we'll define what a research proposal is, why you need to write a proposal, and who's going to read it. Then we're going to focus on your research and the importance of developing an effective problem statement before we get into what goes into your proposal and in what order. From time to time, you'll be asked to stop this video and reflect on your research and your research proposal. Before you put your research proposal together, it's useful to think about the expectations of a research degree. Your research must be a substantial piece of original research which makes a significant contribution to knowledge. A master's degree by research is generally a little less substantial and perhaps not as original. For example, you might replicate an existing study in a different context. Successfully completing a research degree will show that you have authority in your field. In other words, you have something to say that your peers wish to listen to and which you'll be able to put in writing in the appropriate way. It will also show your ability to effectively communicate your research findings in the professional sphere and the wider international scholarly audience. A research proposal maps out a research problem or issue and a proposed approach to investigate it. In broad terms, it outlines what you'll research, and it justifies why it's important to research it, and it shows how you'll conduct the research. The proposal is an integral part of your first milestone, and it encourages you to work closely with your supervisor in the early stages of development. What's the purpose of a research proposal? Why write one? Well, pause the video for a minute and jot down some reasons why you think your research proposal has value, and then check the next slide. A written proposal gives your supervisors, reviewers, and others an opportunity to judge the value of the research, the feasibility of the project, and the likelihood of its success. As the basis for your thesis, it will also help you to develop valuable skills, including writing skills, that will be useful throughout your research. Here are the tasks. Pause the video now and spend some time thinking about these tasks. How many of them are you on track with? And how many will you need to undertake? We usually think that the review panel is the sole audience of a proposal, and of course your reviewers are important because they'll give approval for your research. They're also protecting the interests of the school and the university as a whole by ensuring that your research has value and that it can be completed within the required time frame. But actually the main audience for your proposal is you, for all the reasons of the previous slide. The term milestone seeks to make this clear. But also consider the wider audience for your research, those beyond your proposal readers. If you think about them and you write for them, then you'll be able to shape your research problem and develop effective research questions. So pause the video and answer these questions. How did you go? Your research should add to what's known in your field, and your academic audience should clearly understand its significance. RMIT University research is often real-world or applied research, so you should ask yourself, who will benefit? And once again, think about how significant your research will be to them. Before we think about how to write a research proposal, it's useful for you to think about what reviewers are looking for. One way to do this is to think about reasons why research proposals fail. Pause the video and make a note of some of these reasons. When you've finished, click Start for the answers. Although different reviewers may feel that some of these are more important than others, and they may be looking for other things, these are the most common reasons for proposal failure. If you're proposing to do a PhD, it needs to have some originality, be potentially significant, and have relative complexity. And if you're doing a Master's by Research, the proposal still needs to demonstrate that the research topic is an important and valuable one. Second, you need to clearly identify why your proposed research has value. Your research questions or problems should be very clear and direct, and it must be possible through research to find answers for your questions or solutions to your problems or a depth of analysis for questions that cannot have a single answer. You need to show a clear understanding of how your proposed research fits into what's already known about the topic and its field. This involves the review of literature. Your methodology needs to match your research purpose, and you should be able to explain why you chose this methodology and these methods and not others. That is, be prepared to justify your choices. You need to provide enough detail about the methods and modes of analysis so that the reviewers are confident that you've made a logical and considered set of choices. Your research needs to be completed within a definite period, and the reviewers will be gauging whether you're likely to complete it within this time. They'll assess if the scope of your research is achievable in the time frame. And very importantly, the review panel needs to understand what you've written. They also want you to demonstrate that you can write concisely and clearly in an appropriate academic style. The first step in creating a research proposal is to craft a research problem statement. We believe that starting with a problem or an issue keeps you open to what your research might be or what it might look like. Of course, your research questions will set the scope of your research eventually, but first it's important to think about how your research will bring knowledge to a sort of trouble that exists in your research area. Here's a template for writing a problem statement for a traditional big book thesis. A problem statement says what you want to do and the reason, that is the problem or what we don't know, finishing with the research significance if the problem is resolved. If you're doing a traditional thesis, pause the video now and have a go at writing your own research problem statement. Here's a template for writing a problem statement for project-led research. Many of you may not actually have a problem that you're researching. If you're doing a creative project, for example, such as producing an art installation, you're likely to be exploring creative production rather than solving a problem. However, there must always be a purpose to your study. So a modified research problem statement, such as this, is likely to be effective. Have a go at describing your project using this template. And when you've finished, ask yourself, does my statement make sense? Or am I having the reaction of, oh, interesting, or so what? or huh? If you're saying so what or huh, then try looking closely at your issues and concerns. Are they the right ones? Is the contribution you're making targeted to your practice or to a broader set of cultural issues? Which one are you choosing? Which one should it be? Your research questions should then fall out of your problem statement if it's properly constructed. Not all questions are of equal importance, however. You need to have a hierarchy of concerns to keep your research focused. Look at your research statement and write some questions that seem to be relevant to what you're doing. Then rank them in order of importance to your research. Pause the video while you do this task. Or if you need more information, click on the Prezi presentation link called Developing Your Research Questions. That's just next to this video. Now that you've got a set of research questions or problems, we can look at how to construct a research proposal. There's no one set structure, so you'll need to check guidelines given to you by your school or have a discussion with your supervisors. All proposals, however, have the same components: the what, the why, and the how of proposed research. We said earlier that your proposal forms the basis for your thesis or dissertation, and most theses need to address all 6 of these components. You can see how your proposal actually addresses the first 3. Of course, these components will need to be more substantially developed across the next 2 milestones of your process, but you'll find that the work on them will be recursive. And it's incredible how this proposal will offer a firm foundation for the work that comes next. Here's a list of elements that are either always or often included. Note that they variously relate to the what, the why, and the how. In fact, if you go through this list and determine whether they are what, why, and how, or a combination of these, that would be very useful. There may be more elements used in particular disciplines, so discuss them with your supervisors and think about which ones go into your research proposal. Now, these elements can stand alone or be combined within the structure required by your school. So just pause the video now, read them carefully, and consider their what, why, and how relationships. An introduction to the whole proposal is often included in the what section, and it follows a general principle for introductions, moving from general to specific, and it usually includes these elements. In general, the what section establishes how your research is situated within your overall topic and your discipline or field, and it identifies the research problem, questions, aims, and objectives. Much of this information is going to come from the literature, and the literature review actually covers what, why, and how. There is information that will help you to write a literature review later in this video, and there are also links to writing and structuring a literature review also next to this video. The why, which comes in the literature review and the research rationale, is an important section of your proposal. You spell out explicitly the significance of your research, why it needs to be done, and who will benefit. And this comes out of effectively showing a gap in the literature where your proposed research fits. it's important to realise that your research is not likely to save the world. However, it's also important to show that your research is relevant and useful to a select group. So don't understate its value. If your research is applied, you'll justify it by identifying the direct and indirect benefits to your stakeholders. Of course, you'll also show how it addresses the gap in the current research. The how. We find the how in methodology and method, but we often lead up to it through the literature review. Your reviewers will be mainly interested in whether your proposed methodology will give you the answers to your research questions or solutions to your research problems. They will look for your justification of this methodology and try to judge whether the research is doable in the time allocated. Unlike the what and the why, there are fewer differences between disciplines in this section, the how. The main difference that you might encounter is where the discussion of the epistemology, that is how you view knowledge, and the theoretical perspective is expected. In STEM disciplines, that's science, technology, engineering, maths and medicine, this is often not, the epistemology is often not needed, although you'll almost certainly need to state any theories, concepts or models that inform your research. If your discipline is humanities, art and design, business or the social sciences, you may need to discuss the reasons for your chosen epistemology. The how section is designed to give your reviewers confidence that you've chosen an appropriate methodology and justified it. It will also show them that you've thought about the data you'll collect, the location and step-by-step methods for collection. For example, if you plan to interview respondents, who will you interview? How will you find them? And will you randomise them, this selection process? How will you randomise it? And how will the data be analysed? Will you use SPSS, NVivo, or other statistical packages, for example? All methodologies have limitations. By stating them, your research credibility will be enhanced. Of course, your methodology will also have strengths, and writing about these is a key part of justifying your choice. In fact, everything you write here in the how section needs to be justified. You might also need resources. If so, identify what you'll need and why. In your research, you may have ethical implications, and if so, you're usually required to identify that you've received ethics approval or you've put in an application. You may not need ethics approval, but you may still need to address ethical issues. For example, in a creative project, if you're writing about others without their permission. Lastly, the research proposal usually presents a time frame. A Gantt chart is ideal for this, and we'll discuss this in a minute. Here are 3 possible problems that you might be having with research design. This first one is tricky. You may have decided that something is true, and then you've set out to prove it. But you may be trying to measure an effect without thinking about A, whether or not the effect actually exists, or B, what the wider context is. So the worst version of this is, I'm doing a PhD, but what I really want to do is change the world. Another thing to watch out for is posing a question that cannot be answered or even problematized because it's too big, too broad, or inaccurately expressed. And the third, well, just because you can answer the question doesn't mean that you should ask it. For instance, Should you bother finding out how well people who score badly on dancing test ability can pick up a foreign language? Is there any possible relationship between dancing scores and foreign language learning? Is it relevant to language teachers or to dance students? Does it predict anything? Now, to do this activity, consider these questions. And you're seeking to reduce the problem space in your research design thinking. So do it relatively seriously. Pause the video now. It's useful to think of your research study as a project, and as such, you become a project manager. This means you need to think of all the activities that you'll be engaged in throughout your candidature and when you plan to do them. Rugg and Peter call a Gantt chart a necessary fiction. Fiction because your chart will change throughout your candidature. Despite this, it's a useful tool for planning. It shows your project schedule by identifying your activities down the left column and the months or years in which you'll conduct them. Although there are free software products to help you do this, you can also just use a simple Excel spreadsheet. Let's look at reviewing the literature and where it fits. The literature is used throughout your research proposal, mainly for the following reasons. Depending on structural guidelines from your school or discipline, the first 4 could be used in the what or why sections, and the last is used in the how section. Pause the video if you'd like to look at these more closely. It's important to understand that your literature review is not just a passive description of relevant research. You need to deeply engage with it and turn it into a well-critiqued story of research relevant to your proposed study that compares, contrasts, and critiques concepts and theories. The literature review you write as part of your research proposal is a starting point for your thesis. However, it will need to be substantially expanded and kept up to date throughout your research degree. Go to the Graduate Research Know-How site to learn more about structuring and writing a literature review. As I said before, you'll see the link near this video. And finally, a word about the writing. Here's a statement from an experienced PhD supervisor that clearly shows the impression poor writing gives. In addition to clear and concise writing, also pay attention to formatting and page numbering. If you're an RMIT student and you decide you need to build your academic writing skills, the library research team can help. Thank you for watching. Here are some recommended online resources to support you throughout your research degree, and here are some recommended readings. And finally, ending with a quote, "Curiosity drives our research projects from the beginning right through to submission." So I hope you have lots of it. Cheers.